He wasn't mourning. He was listening. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And if you believe that some bonds don't end when the heart stops, stay with me. Because this story, it doesn't begin with death. It begins with a dog who refused to believe it. The chapel sits quietly on the edge of a narrow country road just outside York, where the hedgerows lean inward as if guarding secrets, and the air always smells faintly of rain, even on dry days. Inside, the light is soft and filtered through stained glass, casting muted colors across polished wooden pews worn smooth by generations of quiet grief. At the center of the room rests a small white coffin, no longer than a garden bench, adorned with a single arrangement of lilies whose scent drifts gently through the still air. And beside it, pressed close, unmoving, as though carved from shadow and bone, lies a German shepherd. His name is Rex. He hasn't shifted in over 6 hours. Not when the first mourners arrived in hushed coats and damp scarves. Not when the priest cleared his throat to begin the service. Not even when a kind hand tried to coax him away with soft words and trembling fingers. Rex did not growl. He did not whimper. He simply stayed. His body is low, protective, his head resting lightly against the edge of the coffin as if listening through the wood itself. His amber eyes remain open, unblinking, fixed not on the people, not on the room, but on something deeper, something unseen. Most assume it's grief. That simple, human explanation offered when the world refuses to make sense. A dog, loyal beyond reason, unable to let go of the child he loved. And perhaps that is part of the truth. But grief, real grief, has a rhythm. It breaks. It trembles. It breathes. This is something else. There is a stillness in Rex that feels deliberate. Like waiting. Like guarding. A man in the third pew watches more closely than the others. His name is Arthur Cole, though most know him simply as Ash. He stands out here, not because of noise or movement, but because of contrast. Where the others wear black wool and polished shoes, Ash wears a worn leather jacket, creased with years and stories no one is asked to hear. His boots are scuffed, his hands rough, but his eyes, steady, observant, miss very little. He did not come for the girl. Not exactly. He came because someone once told him that when a dog refuses to move, you should pay attention. The priest's voice drifts softly through the chapel, words about peace and rest, and the promise of something beyond, but Ash hears none of it. His focus remains on Rex. On the way the dog's ears twitch, ever so slightly, at sounds too faint for others. On the subtle tightening of muscle beneath fur when footsteps draw too near. On the way his head shifts, just a fraction, as though tracking something inside the coffin itself. Ash exhales slowly. That's not grief, he murmurs under his breath, barely louder than the rustle of coats. That's guarding. No one responds. No one hears him. A woman in the front row, Lily's mother, dabs her eyes with a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking quietly. Beside her, a man sits rigid, his gaze hollow, fixed on the coffin as though willing time to turn backwards. They are lost in their own storm, and the world beyond it barely exists. But Rex remains, unmoved, unbroken. The scent of lilies grows heavier as the room warms, mingling with polished wood and candle wax. Outside, a faint breeze brushes against the chapel walls, whispering through the narrow windows. Somewhere in the distance, a car passes along the country road, its tires humming softly over damp tarmac. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments. Yet inside, something feels suspended, as though the room itself is holding its breath. Rex shifts, just once. It is small, so small most would miss it. His ear lowers, pressing closer to the coffin's surface. His head tilts, barely perceptible, as though aligning with something beneath the wood. Then he stills again. Ash notices. Of course he does. His jaw tightens slightly, his gaze sharpening. He takes a slow step forward, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet that blankets the room. Another step. The floorboards creak faintly beneath his weight, drawing a few glances, but no one speaks. All eyes return quickly to the front, to the ceremony, to the safe script of mourning. But Ash is no longer watching the ceremony. He is watching the dog, and the dog is listening. The minutes stretch in a way that feels unnatural, as though time itself has slowed to watch what the dog will do next. And Rex does nothing that resembles mourning, nothing that resembles surrender. Instead, he breathes in slow, measured rhythms, his chest rising and falling with quiet control, his nose barely brushing the smooth lacquered wood as if memorizing it, as if confirming something again and again that no one else can hear. And Ash remains standing a few steps closer now, just off to the side of the aisle, his weight balanced carefully as though he has learned over years not to rush moments that matter, his eyes tracking every subtle movement, every flicker of ear, every tightening of muscle beneath Rex's coat. And it is there, in those details, that something begins to form, not a conclusion, not yet, but a feeling, the kind that settles low in the chest and refuses to be ignored. Because grief does not make a dog listen like this. Grief does not sharpen instinct. Grief does not hold a body, so still it becomes almost deliberate. And across the room the priest continues, his voice calm and steady, speaking of peace and rest and gentle crossings, the language of comfort, the language people reach for when nothing else will soften the weight of loss. And still Rex does not react, not to the words, not to the shifting of people in their seats, not even when a young woman steps forward with trembling hands and places a small stuffed rabbit beside the coffin, her fingers lingering just a moment too long as if hoping for something impossible. And as she steps back, her sleeve brushes lightly against Rex's flank, and for the first time, there is a sound, low, quiet, not a growl, not a warning, but something deeper, something that hums beneath the surface like a distant engine, and the woman freezes, her breath catching, unsure whether to move or speak. But Rex does not look at her, does not acknowledge her at all, his attention fixed entirely forward, entirely inward, and Ash sees it, the difference, the intention behind it. And he takes another step, slow, measured, until he stands close enough to hear what others cannot, close enough to see the faint movement of Rex's whiskers as they brush the coffin's edge, close enough to notice the smallest shift in the dog's posture when the room falls briefly silent between prayers. And in that silence, Rex presses his ear down again, firmer this time, holding it there, holding it as though the world beyond the wood matters more than the one around him. And Ash's brow tightens, his mind turning over memories, old instincts, things learned long ago when he rode with men who trusted dogs more than maps. Because dogs did not lie, dogs did not imagine, dogs did not cling to hope unless there was something real beneath it. And something about this moment does not fit the shape of farewell. It fits something else entirely, something unfinished, and the air in the chapel feels thicker now, heavier, as though even the candles burn a little slower, their flames steady but watchful. And a man in the second row. Is happening here is not something that will reveal itself politely. It is not something that will wait for permission. And he shifts his stance, glancing once toward the front, toward the priest, toward the grieving family, weighing the moment, weighing the cost of being wrong against the cost of ignoring what is right in front of him. And behind him, through the open chapel doors, the distant rumble of engines approaches, low and familiar, the sound of other riders arriving late, their presence carrying with it a different kind of gravity, a different kind of witness. And Ash lowers his gaze back to Rex, his voice barely more than breath as he speaks, not to the room, not to the people, but to the dog himself. What are you trying to tell us, mate? And for the briefest moment, Rex's ear twitches, not toward the room, not toward the door, but toward the man, as if he heard, as if he understood. And then, just as quickly, his attention returns to the coffin, unwavering, unyielding, as though whatever answer exists is still inside. The sound of engines settles outside like a distant storm that has chosen not to break, a low, steady rumble fading into silence as the last of the riders cut their ignition. And for a moment the world beyond the chapel presses closer, as if drawn toward whatever tension now hangs in the air. And inside, something has shifted, not visibly, not in a way anyone could point to, but in the subtle tightening of breath, the way shoulders stiffen without knowing why, the way even the priest's voice falters just slightly before continuing, softer now, less certain, as though the words he has spoken 100 times no longer feel quite enough. And Ash does not turn toward the door, does not acknowledge the arrival of his companions, because all of his attention remains fixed on Rex, on the unwavering line of the dog's body, on the quiet insistence of something that refuses to resolve. And then it happens again, small, almost invisible, Rex's ear presses down harder, his head angling just a fraction, and there is a pause, a stillness within the stillness, and Ash leans forward, just enough to hear it. Not a sound exactly, not something that travels through air, but something felt, a faint, irregular tapping beneath the wood, so soft it could be mistaken for imagination, for the settling of timber, for anything but what it suggests. And yet Rex reacts, his body tightening for the briefest second before easing again, as though confirming, as though acknowledging, and Ash's breath catches, not sharply, not enough to draw attention, but enough to change something inside him, enough to move him from observer to participant, because there are moments in a life when hesitation becomes a kind of silence, and silence becomes a choice, and he has made enough of those to recognize the cost, and so he straightens, his voice low but clear, cutting gently through the chapel's fragile quiet. Did anyone check properly? And the words hang there, uncertain, unwelcome, and a few heads turn, confusion flickering across faces already burdened with grief. And Lily's father looks up again, slower this time, as though the effort of hope is heavier than sorrow. What do you mean? He asks, his voice rough, worn thin by hours that feel like days. And Ash does not rush his answer, does not dramatize what he cannot yet prove. He simply gestures toward Rex, toward the stillness that is not still. He is not letting go, he says quietly, not even for a second. And someone in the back shifts, murmuring something about dogs and attachment, about loyalty that does not understand loss. But Ash shakes his head slightly, his gaze never leaving the coffin. No, he murmurs, almost to himself, this is not that. And the priest steps forward then, gentle but firm, a man accustomed to guiding people through uncertainty. Sir, he says softly, this is a place of farewell. But there is no rebuke in his tone, only caution, only the desire to protect what little peace remains. And Ash nods once, respectful, but unmoved, because the rhythm beneath the wood has come again, faint, irregular, real enough that it settles into his bones. And Rex shifts with it. Not reacting in fear, not reacting in distress, but in recognition. And that is what changes everything. Not the sound itself, not yet, but the certainty in the dog's response, the absolute refusal to accept what the room has already decided. And Lily's father takes a step closer, his eyes narrowing, searching Ash's face for something solid, something to hold on to. You are saying, he begins, but the sentence does not finish, because it is too large, too impossible, and Ash does not complete it for him. He simply crouches slowly, lowering himself to Rex's level, his movements deliberate, careful not to startle, careful not to disrupt whatever fragile thread connects the dog to the unseen. And for the first time, he extends his hand, not to pull, not to command, but to rest lightly against Rex's shoulder, and the dog does not resist, does not flinch, but he does turn his head, just enough for their eyes to meet, amber to gray. And in that moment there is no confusion, no doubt, only a quiet, urgent clarity that passes between them without a single sound. And Ash exhales slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, all right. And he rises, turning now to face the room, to face the weight of what he is about to ask. And outside, one of the riders pushes open the chapel door, letting in a thin line of cool air that carries the scent of damp earth and petrol, grounding, real. And Ash speaks again, steadier this time. We need to open it. And the words land differently now, no longer intrusive, no longer careless, but charged with something else. Something that has begun to take shape in the space between doubt and belief. And the room holds its breath. Once more, not in grief this time, but in the quiet, fragile possibility that something has not yet ended at all. No one moves at first, not because they do not hear him, but because the weight of what he has said presses down too heavily for immediate action, and the room, already fragile with grief, now stands on the edge of something far more uncertain, something that threatens to break the quiet order they have all agreed upon. And the priest lowers his hands slowly, his voice fading into silence, his eyes shifting from Ash to the coffin, then to Rex, as though searching for guidance in a place he has never needed it before. And Lily's father remains standing closest of all, his breathing uneven, his gaze fixed on the small white surface that has already taken too much from him. And for a moment it seems as though he might refuse, as though the risk of hope is simply too great to bear, because hope, when it is wrong, does not comfort, it destroys. And yet Rex moves again, not dramatically, not urgently, but with a quiet insistence that cannot be ignored, his paw lifting slightly, resting against the coffin, then pressing, just once, as if marking a place, as if saying here, and the faintest sound follows, so soft it almost disappears beneath the breath of the room. But this time it is not only Ash who hears it. A woman near the aisle turns her head sharply, her brows drawing together, uncertain whether she imagined it. And Ash speaks again, his voice steadier now, anchored not in belief, but in observation. "You heard that," he says, not accusing, not demanding, simply offering the moment to those willing to see it. And Lily's father swallows hard, his hand rising, again, hovering above Rex. But this time it does not withdraw. It settles gently into the dog's fur, fingers curling slightly as though kneading something solid, something alive, and Rex does not react beyond a slight shift of weight, his focus unbroken, his purpose unchanged, and that, more than anything, begins to unravel the certainty in the room, because a dog may grieve, but a dog does not pretend, and the silence stretches, thin and fragile, until finally the father exhales a long, unsteady breath that carries more than words ever could, and he nods once, barely perceptible, but enough, and Ash understands, stepping forward without hesitation now, his movements calm, deliberate, as though guided by something older than logic, and the priest hesitates only a moment longer before stepping aside, his expression no longer certain, but open, willing, and the others shift subtly, making space, not because they are convinced, but because something has changed, something they cannot name, and Ash reaches the coffin, his hand resting briefly on its surface, feeling the coolness of the polished wood, grounding himself in the reality of what he is about to do. And Rex rises then, slowly, gracefully, not in agitation, but in readiness, stepping back half a pace, just enough to allow access, yet remaining close, his body still angled protectively, still listening, always listening. And Ash glances once toward the father, offering a final chance to stop, to reconsider, but the man does not speak. He only watches, his eyes wide, his breath held, and so Ash nods, almost to himself, and reaches for the edge, his fingers finding the seam where lid meets base. And for a brief second, the world seems to narrow to that single point of contact, to the quiet scrape of wood as it begins to shift, to the collective breath that draws in around the room. And then it opens, slowly, carefully, the lid lifting just enough to reveal the stillness within. And at first there is nothing remarkable, nothing that contradicts what they have been told. A small form resting peacefully, pale, unmoving, and the room exhales. A ripple of quiet disappointment, of relief perhaps, that order has been restored, that nothing impossible has occurred. And yet Rex does not move away, does not lower his guard. Instead he steps forward again, his head dipping closer, his nose hovering just above the girl's hand. And then, in that suspended moment where belief and doubt hang in perfect balance, there is a movement, not large, not dramatic, but undeniable, the faintest tremor beneath the stillness, a subtle shift of fingers, as though responding to something only the dog had sensed all along. And the air changes, instantly, completely, the quiet no longer heavy but electric, alive with something fragile and fierce, and Lily's father gasps, a sound that breaks through the room like light through cloud, and Ash does not speak, does not react with shock, because he is already moving, already acting, his voice calm but urgent as he turns toward the others. "She is still with us." And Rex, for the first time since the chapel doors opened, lets out a sound that is not restrained, not controlled, but full, a low, trembling release that carries relief, certainty, and something deeper than either, as though he had been holding the truth alone, waiting for the world to catch up, and now, finally, it has. For a moment, no one breathes, not fully, not completely, as though the entire chapel has forgotten how, because what they have just seen does not fit into any order they understand. It does not belong to grief, nor ritual, nor reason, and yet it is there, undeniable, fragile, real, and Lily's hand rests where it had been placed, pale against the soft lining, but no longer entirely still, no longer entirely distant. And her father's knees give slightly, not in collapse, but in surrender to something greater than his strength, and he reaches forward without thinking, his hand trembling as it finds hers, warm enough to hold hope, warm enough to refuse the finality they had already accepted, and Rex stands close, so close that his breath brushes against her fingers, his body no longer rigid, no longer braced, but easing, slowly, carefully, like a guard who knows the watch is ending but does not yet dare to step away. And Ash turns sharply toward the doorway, his voice firm now. No hesitation left. Call an ambulance, now. And the words cut cleanly through the stunned silence, jolting the room back into motion, into purpose, and one of the riders outside moves immediately, pulling a phone from his jacket, stepping into the open air where signal is stronger, his voice urgent but controlled as he gives the location, the details, the impossible reality that now demands response. And inside, the priest steps forward again, not with ceremony, not with script, but with something simpler, something human, his hands hovering uncertainly before settling gently near the edge of the coffin, as though offering presence rather than guidance. And Lily's mother lets out a sound that begins as a sob, but transforms midway, rising into something lighter, something disbelieving, her hands covering her mouth as tears fall freely, no longer bound to sorrow alone. And Ash kneels beside the coffin, his movements precise, careful, watching Lily's chest, watching for the rhythm of breath, faint but present, subtle but undeniable. And Rex lowers himself once more, but this time not in vigilance, not in defense, but in closeness, his head resting near her arm, his eyes softer now. Still watchful, always watchful, but no longer burdened by the need to convince the world of what he already knew. And the minutes that follow stretch and fold in strange ways, filled with small actions that carry immense weight. A coat placed gently over Lily's form, a hand brushing her hair back from her forehead, quiet voices speaking her name as though calling her home from somewhere just beyond reach. And outside, the distant wail of sirens begins to rise, faint at first, then clearer, threading its way through the countryside roads, cutting through fields and hedgerows, drawing nearer with each passing second. And Ash glances toward the sound, then back to Rex. And there is a brief, silent understanding between them, not one of ownership or command, but of shared witness, as though both had stood at the edge of something unseen and chosen not to turn away. And Lily's fingers move again, this time slightly more, a small curl, a response to warmth, to presence, to the quiet insistence of life that had not left her after all. And her father leans closer, his voice breaking as he whispers her name, not demanding, not pleading, simply offering it. And the air feels different now, lighter, charged not with fear, but with fragile certainty. And when the chapel doors open fully to admit the paramedics, their uniforms crisp against the muted tones of the room, their movements efficient yet careful, they pause just a fraction, just long enough to take in the scene, to understand that this is no ordinary call, that something extraordinary has already begun before they arrived. And they step forward quickly, respectfully, assessing, confirming, working with calm precision as they prepare to move her. And Rex rises again, not blocking, not resisting, but staying close, his body aligned with hers as though escorting, as though ensuring that whatever path she takes next, she will not walk it alone. And Ash steps back slightly, giving space, his role now complete. Yet his presence remains steady, grounded, and as Lily is lifted gently, carefully, the smallest sound escapes her, not a word, not yet, but something that belongs to waking, to returning, and it ripples through the room like quiet light. And Rex follows as far as he is allowed, stopping only when guided softly by one of the riders, his gaze fixed on her until the very last moment, until the doors close behind her and the sirens carry her away, and the chapel stands in a silence unlike the one before, not empty, not heavy, but filled with something that lingers, something that does not need to be spoken. Because sometimes the truth arrives not through certainty, not through proof, but through the quiet refusal of one loyal heart to accept an ending that was never meant to be. The sirens fade into the distance slowly, not all at once, but in a long, dissolving echo that leaves the countryside quieter than before, as though the world itself has stepped back to make space for what just happened. And inside the chapel, no one speaks for several seconds, not because there are no words, but because none of them feel right. None of them feel large enough to hold what they have just witnessed. And Rex remains near the open doorway, his body angled toward the road where her husband remains standing. Though his posture has changed, the heaviness that once bent him now replaced by a fragile uprightness, as though something inside him has been returned, not fully, not yet, but enough to stand on. And he turns toward Ash, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. "You heard it first," he says, not accusing, not praising, simply acknowledging. And Ash shakes his head gently, his gaze drifting toward Rex. "No," he replies, his tone steady. "He did, and that is the truth." That settles most deeply in the room, not spoken loudly, not repeated, but understood, because every person present had seen it, had felt it. The way the dog refused to yield, the way he listened when no one else thought to, the way he held the line between life and loss without ever needing to explain why. And outside, the remaining riders stand in a loose circle near their motorbikes, their jackets catching the faint breeze, their presence quiet but solid. And one of them steps forward, crouching slightly as Rex finally turns away from the road, his posture no longer rigid, no longer bound by duty, but easing into something softer, something that resembles rest. And the man offers a hand, not commanding, not calling, just there. And Rex walks past him slowly, not seeking comfort, not yet, but accepting the closeness of those who remained, those who understood enough to stay silent when it mattered. And Ash watches him for a moment longer before stepping outside as well, the cool air brushing against his face, grounding him in the ordinary world again, the scent of damp soil and distant fields reminding him that life continues, even after moments that feel like they should stop everything. And he leans briefly against one of the bikes, his eyes closing just for a second, not from exhaustion, but from the quiet weight of what is past. And when he opens them again, Rex is standing beside him, closer now, his amber eyes no longer searching, no longer questioning, but calm, steady, present. And Ash exhales softly, a faint smile touching the edge of his expression. "You knew," he murmurs, not expecting a response, not needing one. And Rex simply sits, his body relaxed for the first time since the chapel doors opened, his head lowering slightly as if the long watch has finally ended. And in that stillness, there is no triumph, no grand resolution, only a quiet understanding that something important has been held together, not by force, not by certainty, but by trust. And somewhere down the road, miles away now, Lily is breathing, slowly, steadily, carried forward by the same unseen thread that her dog refused to let break. And back at the chapel, the lilies still rest beside the empty coffin, their scent lingering in the air, no longer a symbol of farewell, but something else entirely, something softer, something unfinished. And as the light shifts through the stained glass, casting new colors across the floor, it feels as though the room itself has changed, not dramatically, not in a way that could be measured, but in the quiet way that places remember what has happened within them, holding it gently, without explanation, without demand, simply allowing it to exist. And Ash pushes himself upright, glancing once more at Rex before turning toward the others, his voice low, almost lost in the breeze. "Come on, mate," he says, and this time, Rex follows without hesitation, leaving the doorway behind, not because he has forgotten, but because he no longer needs to stay, because sometimes the strongest kind of loyalty is not in holding on, but in knowing when the one you guarded has found their way back. And in that knowing, there is peace, quiet, steady, and real. The road stretches ahead in long, quiet lines, damp from the earlier mist, reflecting the pale gray sky in broken patches of light. And the group of motorbikes moves slowly at first, not with urgency, not with noise, but with a kind of unspoken respect for what has just passed. Engines low, controlled, as though even the machines understand that this is not a moment to disturb. And Rex rides in the back of a worn utility van that follows just behind, the door slightly open to let in the cool air, his posture steady but no longer rigid, his head resting near the edge, eyes open, watching the world move again after hours of stillness, and beside him sits one of the riders. Quiet, offering nothing more than presence, which for now is enough, and Ash leads the line ahead, his shoulders relaxed, his grip on the handlebars loose, not careless, but no longer driven by tension, because the urgency that once pulled him forward has settled into something quieter, something that does not demand action but invites reflection, and the countryside passes by in slow, familiar patterns, hedgerows, stone walls, open fields stretching wide beneath the soft light, and for the first time since the chapel, Ash allows his mind to return to the moment, not to question it, not to dissect it, but simply to sit with it, to let it exist without needing to explain how a dog could hold on to something that every human in the room had already let go. And behind him, in the van, Rex shifts slightly, lifting his head just enough to catch a scent carried on the wind, something faint, something distant, but familiar, and his ears rise, not sharply, not in alarm, but in recognition. And he exhales softly, a slow release that seems to travel through his entire body, as though something deep within him has finally eased, and the rider beside him notices, glancing down with a quiet curiosity. "You all right there, lad?" He murmurs, not expecting an answer, and Rex does not respond in any way that could be heard, but his posture changes, subtly, his weight settling more fully, his muscles loosening, as if the long watch has truly ended now, not just in action, but in spirit. And miles ahead, beyond bends and narrow lanes, the hospital stands with its clean lines and steady lights, a place of order, of systems, of measured care, and within it, Lily lies surrounded by quiet movement, gentle voices, hands that check and adjust and confirm, her breathing steadier now, her body responding slowly to warmth, to attention, to the simple act of being given time again, and her parents sit nearby, not speaking much, not needing to, their presence anchored not in fear anymore, but in something far more delicate, something that feels like hope learning how to exist again. And back on the road, the convoy begins to slow as they approach a crossroads, Ash raising one hand briefly to signal, guiding the group toward a stop where gravel meets tarmac and a small sign points toward the town ahead, and the engines quiet one by one until only the soft ticking of cooling metal remains. And for a moment, no one dismounts, no one speaks, because sometimes silence is not emptiness, it is respect, it is understanding, and Ash finally swings his leg over, boots touching the ground with a steady thud, his gaze drifting back toward the van as the door opens fully and Rex steps down. His movements unhurried, his paws meeting the earth with a calm certainty, and he looks around, taking in the space, the open sky, the faint scent of fields carried on the breeze, and then his eyes settle on Ash, not with urgency, not with demand, but with a quiet acknowledgement, as if recognizing that this man had listened when others had not, and Ash nods once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that carries weight, because there are connections that do not require words, only shared moments that cannot be undone. And one of the riders approaches, hands in his jacket pockets, his voice low. "That was not ordinary, was it?" he says, not as a question that needs answering, but as a truth that needs to be spoken aloud at least once. And Ash shakes his head slightly, glancing toward Rex again. "No," he replies, his tone calm, grounded. "It was not." And the man follows his gaze, watching the dog for a moment before nodding slowly, as though understanding something, without needing it explained, and the wind shifts gently, carrying with it the distant echo of a siren now barely audible, a reminder that the story is still moving somewhere beyond this quiet road, that life continues, unfolding in ways none of them can fully see. And Rex lifts his head once more, his ears catching that distant sound, and for a brief second, his eyes soften further, as if he knows, as if somewhere deep within him, the thread he followed so fiercely has now become something lighter, something that no longer pulls with urgency but rests with certainty. And Ash watches him, his expression thoughtful, not searching for answers, not needing to define what has happened, because some moments do not belong to logic, they belong to faith, not the loud kind, not the spoken kind, but the quiet, steady kind that lives in actions, in choices, in the simple refusal to walk away when something feels unfinished. And as the group prepares to move again, engines stirring back to life one by one, there is a sense that something has shifted, not just for Lily, not just for her family, but for everyone who stood in that chapel and witnessed a truth carried not by words, but by a dog who listened. When the world chose silence, and when Ash mounts his bike once more, he does not look back immediately. He waits, just a second, just long enough for Rex to step forward and settle beside the van again, ready to continue, ready to follow wherever the road now leads, not because he must, but because he chooses to, and that, more than anything, is what remains. Long after the sirens fade and the doors close and the world returns to its usual rhythm, the quiet understanding that sometimes the ones who cannot speak are the ones who hear most clearly, and when they refuse to let go, it is worth listening. The hospital lights glow steadily against the late afternoon sky, pale gold fading slowly into blue as the day leans toward evening, and the steady rhythm of activity inside continues without pause. Nurses moving quietly between rooms, voices low, footsteps softened by polished floors, and in one of those rooms, tucked just beyond the main corridor, Lily lies beneath a light blanket, her breathing now even, no longer fragile in the way it had been, but still gentle, still watched carefully by the machines that hum in quiet reassurance beside her, and her parents sit close, not speaking much, their hands never far from hers, as though contact alone can anchor her here, as though letting go, even for a second, might risk losing what has only just been returned. And outside the hospital entrance, the convoy arrives not with noise, but with a slow, respectful presence, engines easing down, tires rolling softly over the tarmac, and Ash removes his helmet, the cool air brushing his face. Once more, grounding him again in the ordinary world that now feels slightly altered, slightly wider, as if something unseen has shifted just enough to let more light through, and Rex steps down from the van, his movements calm, purposeful, his nose lifting as he catches the scent carried through the open doors, antiseptic, fabric, metal, and beneath it all, faint but unmistakable, the trace of someone he knows, and his ears rise slightly, not in alarm, not in urgency, but in recognition, and without needing direction. He begins to move forward, steady, unhurried, as though following a path already known to him, and Ash watches for a moment before falling into step behind, not leading, not guiding, simply accompanying, and inside. The reception area quiets just a fraction as the group enters, not out of fear or disruption, but out of curiosity, of awareness that something unusual moves through the space, something that carries its own gravity, and Rex does not hesitate, his paws soft against the floor, his gaze fixed ahead, weaving gently through the corridor as though memory itself is guiding him, and a nurse steps forward, ready to intercept, to question, but she pauses when she sees the dog's expression, the focus, the quiet certainty, and something in her softens, her hand lowering as she steps aside, allowing him to pass, because not every moment needs to be controlled, and some cannot be, and when Rex reaches the doorway, he stops, just briefly, his head tilting slightly, as if confirming, and then he steps inside, and the room changes in a way no one can quite describe, not in sound, not in light, but in feeling, as though something has completed a circle that had been left open, and Lily's mother looks up first, her eyes widening as she sees him, her breath catching not in fear, but in recognition. Rex, she whispers, the name carrying both disbelief and quiet relief, and her husband turns as well, his expression softening in a way that had not been possible hours before, and Rex approaches slowly, respectfully, not bounding, not rushing, but closing the distance with care, his body low, his movements deliberate, and when he reaches the bed, he pauses again, his nose hovering just above Lily's hand, the same place he had guarded so fiercely, and for a moment, nothing happens, the room holding its breath once more, waiting without knowing it is waiting, and then her fingers move, not faintly this time, not uncertainly, but with a gentle, waking motion, curling slightly toward the warmth near them, and her eyes flutter, slowly, the world returning in fragments of light and shadow, and Rex exhales softly, a sound that carries no tension, no urgency, only release. As though something deep within him has finally settled into place, and Ash stands quietly at the doorway, not stepping further, not intruding on the moment, his presence steady but distant enough to allow the scene to belong to those who need it most. And Lily's eyes open just enough to focus. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to see shapes, to sense presence. And when her gaze meets Rex, something shifts, something quiet and immediate, like recognition that does not require memory. And her lips part slightly, no words forming yet, but the intention there, the beginning of return. And her mother leans closer, her voice trembling but steady. "You are safe, love," she whispers, and the words seem to settle into the room like something tangible, something real, and Rex lowers his head gently beside her arm, not pressing, not claiming, simply being there. And in that simple act, everything that needed to be said already has been. And outside the room, the hospital continues as it always does. Steady, ordered, predictable, but within this space, something quieter and far more enduring takes root. Not loud, not dramatic, but certain, like a truth that has no need to prove itself. And Ash turns slightly, preparing to step away, not because he is leaving, but because his part in this has reached its natural end. And as he does, Rex lifts his head just once, his eyes meeting Ash's across the room. A brief connection, steady and clear, and Ash nods, almost imperceptibly, before turning back toward the corridor, because some stories do not end with celebration. They end with something softer, something that lingers in the quiet spaces between moments, where loyalty has done its work and life, gently, begins again. The corridor outside the room feels quieter than before, not empty, but softened, as though the building itself has adjusted to the weight it briefly carried. And Ash walks slowly along it, his boots making almost no sound against the polished floor, his pace unhurried, his thoughts no longer pressing forward but settling into place one by one. And behind him, through the partially open door, the low murmur of voices continues, gentle, careful, the sound of people learning how to speak again after fear has loosened its grip. And he does not turn back immediately, not because he does not care, but because he understands that some moments are not meant to be watched from beginning to end. Some are meant to be trusted to continue without witness. And as he reaches the end of the corridor, he pauses near a window that looks out across the car park and beyond it the rolling fields, now touched by the last light of day, and he rests one hand lightly against the glass, not from weariness, but from a quiet instinct to steady himself in the ordinary, because what has just happened does not leave a person unchanged, even if they do not yet know how. And outside, the riders remain gathered, their presence still, grounded, their machines lined neatly in a row, chrome catching the fading light in soft glints. And among them, Rex sits near the entrance, though not as close as before, not pressed against the threshold, but simply there, present, his posture relaxed in a way that speaks of something completed, something resolved. And one of the men crouches nearby, offering a quiet word, a gentle scratch behind the ear, and this time Rex leans into it, just slightly, not out of need, but out of acceptance, as though the long distance between vigilance and rest has finally been crossed. And Ash watches through the glass for a moment before turning away, moving back toward the room, drawn not by urgency, but by something quieter, something that feels like closure waiting to be understood. And when he reaches the doorway again, he does not step inside immediately. He stands just to the side, allowing the scene to unfold without interruption. And inside, Lily is more awake now, not fully, not strong, but present in a way that carries unmistakable life. Her eyes open, her gaze moving slowly between the faces around her, taking in each one as though rebuilding the world piece by piece. And her mother sits close, one hand gently brushing her hair, the other holding hers, as if contact alone can keep the moment anchored in reality. And her father stands beside them, his posture no longer rigid, no longer braced against loss, but softened, his shoulders lowered, his expression one of quiet wonder, as though he is seeing something he had already said goodbye to. And Rex lies near the bed now, his body stretched along the floor, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but not asleep, never entirely, always aware. And when Lily's gaze settles on him again, there is a faint change in her expression, something small, something that might be missed if one is not looking for it. The beginning of a smile, fragile but real, and her fingers move once more, reaching just enough to bridge the small distance, and Rex lifts his head, responding immediately, gently placing his nose beneath her hand, allowing the contact without pressing, without overwhelming. And in that simple exchange, there is a conversation that needs no words, a recognition that runs deeper than memory, deeper than explanation, and Ash remains where he is, his presence unnoticed but not unwelcome, because he understands that this moment belongs to them, not to the one who opened the door, but to those who walked through. Than anything else, that sometimes the world does not need to be understood to be believed, that sometimes it asks only that someone pays attention when it matters most. And behind him, in the room he leaves, life continues, slowly, gently, one breath at a time, guided not by explanation, but by something far simpler, far older, the kind of bond that does not ask for proof, because it has already proven itself in the only way that matters, by refusing to let go when everything else has. The night settles fully over the hospital, not with darkness alone, but with a quiet steadiness that seems to hold everything in place. The corridors dimmed slightly, footsteps fewer, voices softer, as though the building itself understands that some moments need gentler light. And inside Lily's room, the rhythm has changed again, no longer fragile in the way it once was, no longer uncertain, but not yet strong. Instead, something in between, something patient, something that grows without needing to be forced. And she sleeps now, not the distant, unreachable stillness from before, but a true sleep, one that carries warmth, breath, and the subtle rise and fall that reassures without words. And beside her, her mother remains seated, her head resting lightly against the edge of the bed, her hand still holding Lily's, though her eyes have closed at last, exhaustion gently overtaking the fear she carried for so long. And her father stands near the window, looking out at the faint reflections of streetlights across the car park, his posture relaxed in a way that feels new, unfamiliar even to him, as though he has not yet fully accepted that he no longer needs to brace himself against loss. And on the floor, Rex lies close, not pressed against the bed now, not guarding, but resting, his breathing slow, his body stretched in quiet ease. Yet even in rest, his ears remain tuned, catching small sounds, subtle shifts, not out of tension, but out of habit, out of a loyalty that has learned to remain present even when the danger has passed. And in the corridor outside, Ash walks once more, though this time without the weight of urgency, his steps measured, his gaze calm, and he pauses briefly near the nurse's station where a soft lamp casts a warm circle of light, and a nurse looks up, offering a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that something unusual has passed through her shift, something that will not be written fully in any report. And Ash returns the nod, not needing to explain, not needing to speak, because there are moments that do not belong to explanation. And he continues on, moving toward the exit where the night air waits, cool and steady. And as the door opens, the scent of damp grass and distant fields greets him again, grounding, familiar. And outside, a few of the riders remain, not all, but enough, their presence quiet, their voices low as they speak among themselves, not about what happened in detail, but about smaller things, ordinary things, as though giving the moment space by not trying to hold it too tightly. And Rex's absence is noticed, but not questioned, because they understand where he is meant to be. And Ash steps down the small setup. The dog lifts his head instantly, his body rising without hesitation, moving closer, his tail giving the smallest, slowest motion, not wild, not excited, but certain. And he rests his head gently against the side of the bed, meeting her gaze fully now, no longer guarding, no longer questioning, just there. And Lily's fingers find his fur again, this time with intention, with awareness. And her lips form the faintest smile, fragile but unmistakable. And in that moment, nothing else is needed, no explanation, no retelling, no proof, because everything that mattered has already happened in the quiet space between them. in the time when one refused to leave, and now, as the night holds steady around them. The story does not end with noise or celebration, but with something far more enduring, the simple, undeniable presence of life continuing, carried forward by a bond that never broke, even when the world believed it had. The hours pass quietly, not marked by urgency or fear, but by the slow, steady rhythm of recovery that settles into the room like a second kind of light, softer than the lamps, gentler than the machines. And by the early hours of morning, the first pale hint of dawn begins to press against the hospital windows, turning the dark glass into a muted gray that promises another day. And inside Lily's room, the change is subtle but undeniable, her breathing deeper now, more certain, her body no longer held between two fragile states but beginning to belong fully to one again. And her mother wakes first, not abruptly, but with the quiet awareness of someone who has learned to listen even in sleep, her hand still wrapped around her daughter's. And for a moment, she simply watches, not moving, not speaking, as though afraid that any shift might undo what has been given back. But nothing breaks, nothing fades, and a small breath escapes her, not quite a sigh, not quite a prayer, something in between, something that carries both gratitude and disbelief. And beside the bed, Rex has not moved far, his body curled slightly now, his head resting low but his eyes open, always open. And when Lily stirs again, more fully this time, her gaze clearer, her awareness returning in layers, he is the first to notice, lifting his head with quiet precision, his ears rising, his entire attention narrowing to her in the same way it had narrowed to the coffin. Only now there is no tension in it, no urgency, only presence. And Lily blinks slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft light, her focus settling more steadily. And when she sees him again, truly sees him, there is recognition that carries no confusion, no hesitation, and her voice, though still faint, holds more strength than before. "You stayed," she whispers, the words simple, unadorned, yet filled with something deeper than explanation. And Rex does not bark, does not move suddenly. He simply shifts closer, placing his head gently beside her arm once more, as though answering in the only way he knows how. And her fingers find his fur again, holding lightly, not gripping, just enough to confirm that he is there, that he did not leave. And across the room, her father turns from the window, his expression catching that moment, holding it quietly as though committing it to memory. And he steps closer, slower now, no longer driven by fear but guided by something steadier, something that feels like trust. And he rests a hand lightly on Lily's shoulder, his voice low, steady. "We are all here," he says, and the words do not try to explain what happened. They do not question it. They simply anchor the present. And Lily's eyes close briefly, not in weakness, but in acceptance, in the quiet, understanding that she has returned to something real, something held together not by chance, but by something she may never fully understand. And outside the room, the hospital begins to wake, morning staff arriving, footsteps increasing, the low hum of a new shift taking over. But inside, the space remains calm, protected, as though time has been given permission to move more gently here. And Ash returns once more, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with a quiet intention to see, to confirm with his own eyes what he already knows. And when he reaches the doorway, he pauses again, his presence steady, unobtrusive, and Lily notices him this time, her gaze shifting slightly, curious, not afraid. And her father glances toward him, offering a small nod, a silent invitation that carries both gratitude and recognition. And Ash steps inside slowly, his boots making almost no sound, his posture relaxed. And he does not speak immediately, because there are moments where words would only interrupt what is already complete. And instead he simply inclines his head slightly, acknowledging her, acknowledging the life that now fills the space where there had been none. And Lily watches him for a moment, then gives the smallest nod in return, as though understanding that he played a part she cannot fully see. And Rex remains between them, not as a barrier, not as a guard, but as a bridge, something constant that connects all the fragments of what has happened into a single, quiet truth. And Ash exhales softly, a breath that carries closure rather than relief. And he steps back once more, not needing to remain, not needing to witness anything further, because the story has already reached the place it was meant to, not in grand declarations or dramatic endings, but in this simple, undeniable reality that life has continued where it might have stopped, and it did so because one loyal heart refused to accept silence as the final answer. And as the morning light grows stronger, filtering through the window in soft gold, it touches everything in the room gently: the bed, the floor, the hands that still hold each other, the dog that lies quietly at their side. And in that light, there is no need for explanation, no need for certainty. Only the quiet understanding that some bonds do not break when the world expects them to. They hold, they wait, and sometimes they bring someone all the way back. The morning unfolds slowly, not in sudden brightness, but in a gentle widening of light that slips through the hospital windows and settles softly across the room, touching everything without urgency. And Lily lies awake now, fully aware in a way that feels both new and familiar, as though she has returned from somewhere distant and is relearning the shape of the world one quiet moment at a time. And beside her, Rex remains where he has always been, close enough to feel, far enough not to overwhelm, his presence steady, unchanged. And when she moves her hand again, more confidently now, he responds without hesitation, lifting his head and leaning just enough into her touch to meet it, not claiming, not demanding, simply acknowledging that she is there, that she has come back, and her parents watch in silence, not needing to interrupt, not needing to speak, because what passes between them does not belong to words. And across the room, Ash stands once more near the doorway, though this time there is no weight to his presence, no question left unanswered, only a quiet sense of completion that settles into his posture. And he glances around briefly, taking in the small details that now feel significant in their simplicity: the soft hum of machines, the gentle rise and fall of Lily's breath, the way her mother's hand no longer trembles when it brushes her hair, and the way her father stands without that shadow of fear that once held him still. And it is in these details that the true shift reveals itself, not in the moment of rescue, but in what follows, in the quiet continuation of life that now moves forward without needing to prove anything. And Lily turns her head slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window where the light grows stronger, and she blinks as if adjusting not just to the brightness, but to the reality of being here again. And her voice, though still soft, carries a clearer tone. "It felt quiet," she says, not fully forming the thought, not needing to explain. And her mother leans closer, listening without interrupting, allowing the words to come as they will. And Lily's eyes shift back toward Rex, resting there, and she adds simply, "But I could hear him." And the room holds that statement gently, without challenge, without question, because there are moments when truth does not need to be examined, it only needs to be accepted. And Ash lowers his gaze slightly, a faint exhale leaving him as though something within has settled more deeply into place. And he steps back once more, his role already finished, yet still present in the quiet way that witnesses remain even after the event has passed. And outside the room, the corridor carries the soft rhythm of morning, nurses exchanging brief words, footsteps passing without interruption, the world continuing in its steady, predictable way. And yet within this space, something has shifted permanently, something that cannot be undone. And Rex shifts slightly, his body relaxing further, his tail resting loosely against the floor, no longer held in readiness, no longer waiting for a signal, because there is nothing left to guard, nothing left to hold together. And Lily's hand remains in his fur, absent-minded now, natural, as though it has always been there, as though the space between them was never truly broken. And her father moves closer, placing a chair beside the bed, sitting slowly, his eyes never leaving her. And for a moment he simply watches, taking in the details he thought he had lost forever, the movement of her fingers, the quiet rise of her chest, the light in her eyes. And he speaks at last, his voice steady, grounded. "You gave us a fright," he says gently, not as a reprimand, not as a question, but as a simple truth wrapped in relief. And Lily's lips curve slightly, a small, tired smile that carries more meaning than any full expression could. And she does not answer, because she does not need to, Because everything that matters has already been said in other ways, in quieter ways, and Ash turns to leave then, not abruptly, not unnoticed, but with the calm certainty of someone who understands when a story no longer needs him to remain. And as he reaches the doorway, he pauses just briefly, his eyes meeting Rex's once more, and there is no command, no farewell, only a shared recognition that something important has been held and released, and Ash nods once, almost imperceptibly, before stepping into the corridor and letting the door fall softly behind him. And inside the room, the light continues to grow, filling the space with a gentle warmth that feels earned, that feels real, and Lily closes her eyes again, not from exhaustion, but from peace, her hand still resting in the familiar place it never truly left, and Rex settles fully at last, his head lowering, his eyes closing just enough to rest without losing awareness. And in that quiet stillness, the story does not end with a final word, but with something far more enduring, the simple, steady continuation of life, held together by a bond that never needed to speak to be understood. The day moves forward in quiet increments, not marked by dramatic change, but by the steady unfolding of something that feels both fragile and certain. And as the sun rises higher, its light shifts from pale gold to a warmer glow that fills the hospital room more fully, softening the edges of everything it touches, and Lily rests against her pillows, awake now for longer stretches, her strength returning in small, measured ways, each breath a little deeper, each movement a little more sure. And Rex remains at her side, not out of duty anymore, not bound by the silent urgency that once held him there, but because it is where he belongs, because his presence has become part of the rhythm of her recovery, as natural as the quiet hum of the machines or the gentle voices that pass through the room. And her parents move around her with a new kind of ease, their gestures no longer driven by fear, but guided by care, simple, attentive, grounded in the reality that she is here, that she has stayed. And from time to time, Lily's gaze drifts toward the window, watching the movement of clouds across the sky, the slow passing of something greater than the moment. And when she looks back, Rex is always there, his eyes meeting hers with that same steady awareness that carried him through the hours when no one else could see what he saw. And it is in those quiet exchanges that the truth of what happened settles more deeply, not as a question, not as something to be solved, but as something to be lived with, accepted without the need for explanation. And elsewhere in the hospital, the day continues as it always does, orderly, predictable, filled with routines that hold everything together. And Ash walks through it once more, though now he is only passing through, his presence no longer tied to the moment that brought him here. And as he reaches the exit, he pauses briefly, not because he must, but because something within him asks for it, and he glances back once, not toward the room specifically, but toward the building itself, as though acknowledging the place where something quiet and extraordinary took shape. And then he steps outside, into the open air, where the world continues without pause, where the road stretches out once more, waiting without expectation, and the riders gather again, preparing to leave, their movements unhurried, their voices low, carrying none of the tension that once filled them. And among them, there is an understanding, unspoken but shared, that what they witnessed does not need to be retold in detail, that it will remain with each of them in its own way, shaping something unseen but lasting. And as the engines start, one by one, their sound rises gently, not harsh, not intrusive, but steady, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. And Ash mounts his bike, his hands settling naturally on the grips, his posture relaxed. And before he pulls away, he looks once more toward the hospital entrance, not expecting anything, not waiting, simply acknowledging. And inside, in that quiet room, Lily sits a little more upright now, supported by pillows, her hand still resting in Rex's fur, and her voice, though soft, carries a clarity that was not there before. He would not leave, would he? She says, not asking, but remembering. And her mother smiles gently, her eyes warm with something deeper than relief. No, she replies, he would not. And Lily nods slightly, as though that answer fits perfectly into a place she has always known. And Rex shifts closer, his body settling once more, his eyes half closing in a calm that speaks not of fatigue, but of completion. And as the light continues to fill the room, there is a stillness that feels whole, that needs nothing added to it. And beyond the walls, the world moves on, unaware of what has been held together within this small space, unaware of the quiet moment when one life was not allowed to slip away. And yet that does not lessen it, does not diminish it, because some things are not meant to be witnessed by many. They are meant to exist fully in the few who were there, in the ones who chose to listen when everything else fell silent. And as the riders pull away, their path leading them back into the wide stretch of countryside, and the hospital settles into its steady rhythm once more, the story does not close with a final line or a clear ending, but with something far more enduring, a quiet understanding that lingers long after the moment has passed, that loyalty is not measured by words or promises, but by presence, by the simple, unwavering act of staying when leaving would be easier, and sometimes that is enough to bring someone back, not with force, not with certainty, but with a kind of grace that asks for nothing and gives everything.